And I kind of sense that there needs to be this willingness to pay any price, so to speak. So at that point, I made a very clear decision, and I can't really say that I made it, but it kind of was made through this first awakening, and also as a result of all the tremendous suffering and pressurization and the dark night. And it was like all these conditions just contributed to this absolute conviction that gave birth to itself. And the conviction was simply that like liberation is possible, like truth realization is possible.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I don't know how to get there, but that's what my life is about.
All right. So today I'm excited to share a new interview with a guest. Her name is Vivie Jokela. She is an awakening facilitator. She has really deep insight in the awakening path into non-duality and no self and the real depths of awakening. So yeah, this is just a little warning that if you're not interested in awakening, that the later parts of the conversation might trigger some stuff in you, because Vivie really shares quite authentically her experience through the shadow and some of the deeper insights, which can startle the mind in some sense. So just a warning. But yeah, it was a really wonderful conversation. And Vivie, I came across her through just seeing her stuff online. She had a conversation with Angelo on Simply Always Awake that I listened to ages ago, and I loved it. And then recently, some of her things just kept on popping up. Somebody mentioned her to me. So I generally take that as a sign that it's time to reach out to somebody and have a conversation. So enjoy. This is Vivie and her awakening journey. So maybe let's begin. I'm really curious always how people end up in this world. Like, can you remember what was your introduction into something different from the way that everybody else was living their lives, and like what took you down this path that led to where you are now?
Yeah, it's interesting for me to feel into it now, where I am now, because it's very, in certain ways, similar to how it was when I was like a very young child, I guess. So I can recognize a lot of similarities, although obviously at that time there wasn't that type of capacity of conscious recognition and really that type of, you could say, knowing yourself as unborn and undying and all of that. But there's something very similar about the child's experience. And I wouldn't necessarily even call it unity myself. I would more call it this type of dream-like nature of experience and kind of magical quality of it. Yeah. And the sense that, you're very, very much in the sensations, and the sensations are very transparent and very vivid, and one moment you're doing something and the next moment it's another thing, and it's very dream-like that reality, how it's kind of like shifts from one scene to another, and you just find yourself there. So that I think is similar to when I was a child. But then somewhere at the age of I think when I started to be like 10 years or 11 years, at that time I started to experience deepening alienation from that. Yeah. And for me, it mostly started to activate because of social interaction. So that started there was something not that natural about it to me, how both children and adults were kind of talking and acting with each other. I couldn't really have a conscious reflection about it at that time, but I couldn't really be part of it, and that started to generate a sense of isolation internally, I guess.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Like for me, it started maybe a little bit, I would say like around the ages of 13. Like I distinctly remember it, that more like separate. Yeah, and it definitely came from like social interactions, where especially around social interactions, I felt like I'd lost some sort of a flow in a sense. It just felt like there was something. Yeah, I don't know. It's just like, I would say for me, that's when suffering started. It's right. Yeah, just this constant in the mind, like something's not right. Something's not right about the way that things are, being experienced. It's funny you mentioned the kind of child state. I'm not sure if you know David Bingham at all. He's a non-dual teacher from the UK.
No, I don't know him. No.
I was just listening to one of his interviews, and he was mentioning like around the ages of 4 to 5, he could shift into this like unity consciousness. Like he would go for a nap or something, and he would kind of rest in that state as a child. So it just came to mind.
Yeah.
So then, how did from the age of 10, like how did that develop, the feeling of something, that separation, the isolation? Yeah.
It started to escalate quite quickly then for me, that I started to experience like devastating sense of like wrongness and need to belong, and that not taking place, and it's just increasing sense of existential angst and confusion, I guess, just like not understanding, what is this place, and what is it that doesn't really work well in this whole interaction with people, basically.
Yeah.
And also for me, at that time, a few years later, my mother was diagnosed with a difficult illness, multiple sclerosis, and she probably had some of the symptoms already before it was diagnosed, but she ended up having a very difficult illness that lasted, like a couple of decades until she passed away. Yeah. So that whole experience impacted me deeply, and was definitely part of my own awakening journey in many, many ways.
Yeah, for sure. So how was your relative life unfolding, like from your teenage years? What was happening for you that then kind of, and where was the first taste that there's a way to address this sense of this feeling of isolation, of that suffering that's building up?
Yeah. My teenage years were not happy, so I was kind of desperately, I guess, searching for some sort of fix for that sense of alienation, but it would never work out for some reason, like whatever I was trying. And then I tried a little bit to search it through art, like some sort of relief, but I wasn't at that time able to commit to any singular art enough consistently that it would have given me like a proper venue to, I don't know, explore reality like that. So I was a little bit just trying different things, and eventually ended up studying aesthetics more philosophically in university. And then through those studies, I got into Oriental philosophy as well. And I ended up doing my whole main thesis on kind of aesthetic, mystical experience from the Shaiva Tantra tradition in Hinduism. And that's very connected to the whole Enlightenment process in that context. So, yeah, but at that time it was still, I mean, I was fascinated about it, but I hadn't yet had any deeper breakthrough into, you could say, what they were talking about.
Yeah, so that's like that initial like calling into the world, if you just find something, like it was the same for me, just I was drawn into philosophy and I didn't quite realize why initially, but it was this more like existential questions that was kind of really interesting to me. So for you, it was like, university and a bit of Hinduism. So how did that unfold?
Yeah, I did that, but I also got involved with yoga, like yoga and meditation and that type of stuff. But the organization that I ended up being part of quite a few years wasn't really that great. Eventually, I ended up realizing that it was a kind of cultist organization.
Right.
And I ended up leaving that behind me. But for the first 10 years of my, I would say, spiritual search, so from the years of like 19 and onwards, it was like that I would do a lot of yoga, I would do a lot of practice, meditation, I would study this stuff in the university, but I couldn't get anywhere with it deeper somehow. Even I had this aspiration. And what initially kind of really kickstarted, I think consciously, my own aspiration, that I had a car accident at the age of 19. And while I was in a hospital, I ended up reading this little book about some sort of Oriental wisdom of enlightenment. And that was something like, I was like I have to know more about that. Whatever they're speaking about in this little book, I gotta find out more about it. And the next book that I read was then speaking about the nature of I am. And it was interpreting Christianity from that perspective. It was saying something like, that when Jesus said that I am the way, I am truth, it suddenly clicked for me, like, wow, it's actually pointing inwards. It's not a religion where you're supposed to be in relationship with some sort of external deity. But what it was all the time saying was, connect with what you really are, your true nature. And I had a little bit of a religious background from my family, so I had this rebellion against Christianity and religion because of that. But it was a kind of lovely recognition that at that time to see that, actually Christianity also has a deeper essence to it, which is not that different from the Oriental quest for awakening and liberation.
Yeah, that's quite cool to have found a book that really kind of put in the more mystical awakening aspect of like Jesus's teachings, because I find it so, I also come from a religious background, like the school I went to very much preached Christianity and all of that. And initially it was like, as my curiosity got more, it was like, completely leave behind religion. And then later on the path, it was like, oh, wow, Jesus was talking about the same thing as all this awakening stuff. So, cool that you found that.
I think Christian mysticism is really fascinating. And Meister Eckhart, I love Meister Eckhart because he went even deeper with it than just this mystical union with the whole experience of breaking through into this Godhead. I love it. It's very somehow in alignment with this type of teachings of emptiness, actually, I feel, that come out from Zen and then Buddhism and so on.
So you had this like initial taste of the I am teachings, and then you mentioned you were doing the meditation and the yoga. What was the meditation practice with the yoga that you were doing? What kind of
mostly it was just the concentration practices with mantra or with some sort of element like that. But there was very strongly this idea that you needed to kind of get somewhere. So it was a very progressive approach that I was being kind of conditioned at that time. So I was very, very strongly trying to get somewhere and kind of assuming that what I am at the moment and whatever the reality is at the moment is not it. Okay? So it's very interesting because if you get a kind of skillful teacher, if they manage to point it out very well that from the beginning that, hey, it's nothing other than what is already occurring and what you already are, I think that can save a lot of time. But at the same time, some of us really need to go through that whole progressive journey. And I think it's also really perfect the way it happens. So I'm pushing and pushing and pushing, and also very much avoiding the suffering. I was very much wanting to get out of that very painful angst and suffering and alienation and fear and shame and confusion that had been devouring me at the teenage years. So I didn't at all understand at that time that real spiritual maturity is actually turning towards the pain, turning towards the suffering, not trying to escape it through practice, whatever your practice is.
Yeah, that's a great point. Angela said it quite nicely, that like the first stage of awakening is really coming into touch with that suffering, even if it's like to try and get away from it, like that. But so many people, I think early on are not even, for me, it was very like, I couldn't avoid it. Like, I think quite similar to you that it was just so in my face. But I think a lot of humans kind of hide that from themselves, that they're actually really suffering. Yeah. So when did you get your first kind of taste of something?
Real taste,
Other than that,
that would be like around the age of 30. That was when the next phase in my life journey kind of opened up. I went for a trip to Hawaii at that time, and that ended up being a very profound experience for me. I connected deeply with the land there and really like fell in love with the elements, just the earth and the sky and the volcanic nature and the power. I really felt a tremendous power there in the land and in the waters, like the purity and the lushness, everything.
Yeah.
So somehow I remember during that trip that I was nighttime, sometime there in the garden where I was staying, and just in this incredible place of just silence, and which I never felt like that before, and really immersed into, you would say, into reality, I guess, and then this kind of inner voice, which doesn't really have words, but it kind of appeared, and it told me that I should come back here to the island and stay indefinitely and do retreats alone in the jungle. And for some reason, I don't know, I listened to that. So it took me a while that I could arrange my life like that. But after I, had enough, financial support, then I did that move, that I went there without kind of knowing at all how it would end up. And
what were you doing at the time, like in the relative, like for work and all of that?
I didn't really have any consistent work. I would just do kind of random things because I had been studying this type of, arts and philosophies that they don't really
not a direct career
give you
path.
a profession, But I would do a lot of different things at the time. So which allowed me to have a bit of a traveling lifestyle or a kind of nomad lifestyle for a few years of my life.
Yeah. Can we talk
I was also teaching yoga at the time, by the way. I was really, that was a whole part of my journey at that time. It's not anymore, but I went through so many different styles of yoga until I also got a little bit disillusioned with that. But
yeah. Can we talk a little bit more about that first shift? Yeah, how was that? Like, what would you say if you can kind of like remember how it felt at the time? What felt like it changed there from the way that reality was experienced before and the way that it was experienced after? And did it stick, or did it kind of open up and close up quite quickly again? Or how was that experienced?
At that time, I feel that what I really started to do is I started to follow my intuition, basically. And I dropped all external, like what other people had told me, that this is what you should do, or this is what spirituality is, or this is what life is about. So I dropped that, and that was a kind of leap of courage, I guess.
Yeah, that letting
go. That made a lot of other things possible.
Right.
I would also kind of get into more awareness about somehow clearing the body at that time in certain ways. That type of practices that I felt also supported it when I did do those retreats, and I ended up having a powerful opening, and powerful non-dual opening in one of those retreats. So I felt there was a kind of preparation leading up to it. And even if that preparation is really nothing other than some sort of gesture that you make to life, that, hey, I'm ready to try something different. Like I really, need to do whatever is necessary and explore different ways of addressing this problem, suffering that I have done before. So when I did that retreat and ended up having like a deeper non-dual breakthrough, of course, it came out of the sudden, and I didn't expect really anything. But that was the first like major kind of, some sort of shattering of my sense of reality, I guess, because it really opened up in a very energetic manner, like I could say the central channel in my being, and this quality of void-like nature of reality. And also this very radiant and luminous nature of all phenomena. And even that experience, of course, was something that it opened and then it closed. But for a moment, the sense of separation was completely gone. Like not just at the mental level, but very viscerally, very, energetically, very physically, that contracted existence was completely like, you could say, if there is this fist, like Adyashanti talks about it sometimes, like that type of like primal grasping, it kind of was open like that, and I think the system can never really forget that, even if it comes back, because you will always keep knowing that it was so real, what was experienced, that you kind of want to go back there. And that's what's the next phase of my journey, that I imagine that, okay, this experience now I need to regain it and make it permanent. So I went through that whole trip for a few years, I think 2 or 3 years, where I would have more openings like that. And every time when it would happen, I would be absolutely sure that this time it would never go away. It was like, how could I ever forget, so to speak? And every time it would then contract back into being just this, human being and so on. And so at that time, it didn't even come to my mind to look at the nature of identity itself, in that sense, the actual awakening process hadn't really even started the way that I like to nowadays talk about the awakening process, which is a very lucid and thorough investigation of the nature of identity itself, or you could say also the nature of reality, like, these fundamental questions, like what is life, or is there such a thing as space? What is infinity? What is time? So I didn't actually do this type of inquiry at all. And that is why, this type of deeper shift wasn't really able to occur.
Yeah, like you mentioned, that the key is really the investigation of identity, because like you said, you can have these shifts and these tastes, but like investigating identity is like really getting to that structure itself. So let's talk about a little bit like the sense of suffering, right? So that sense of suffering that had kind of brought you towards this, and then you had that kind of first real big opening, and then how, in that there was obviously that like that release of all that suffering that you've been carrying in the as the sense of separation kind of dissolved. But then how was that phase? Like you mentioned, like trying to get back to it. What was the sense of suffering? Like, I totally agree with you as well in that sense that it's never like it closes back up again, but it's like in a very real sense, like this is how it felt for me, that you always know that it's still there in a sense, like you've tasted it, and it's like, you can't go completely back into believing the separation or something like that.
So for me, there was like 2 waves that followed, and they very much were interwoven into each other. And so there was a tremendous wave of, I could say, like grace, inspiration that came with this initial opening, and kind of flow, like inspiration, flow, beauty, all of that. And then simultaneously, almost like to balance that, came this wave of shadow, because now I actually started to feel the suffering directly in a completely different way, because some sort of fundamental breakthrough had happened in the system. So I would be pulled almost like into the depths of some sort of like...
now you can really actually feel it, which you've never done before.
And again, because I didn't really have any teachers around me at that time, if someone would have just pointed out that, hey, that's exactly where you need to go. So somehow I always thought that something is really wrong. Why does this terrifying void, empty, whatever, keeps kind of pulling me into itself? And my mind would only experience it as depression and devastating, sense of just nothing. So I wanted to go back to the to the sense of inspiration and that divine radiance just pouring itself, and that type of experiential qualities of awakening that my mind was interpreting as the awakening itself. So I went through a lot of this type of very energetically, again, this type of push and pull. And every time there would be like deepening, opening towards the light, you could say there was equally, a deepening, opening towards the shadow. It's kind of dynamic experience actually to go through something like that. I feel it's very, something really starts to loosen the fundamental, you could say, the structures of your identity. Even it hasn't yet collapsed, you could say, the house of identity, but there is this force that is trying to loosen the underlying structures and creating this kind of powerful pulsating movement of light and darkness. And your experience of reality really expands at this point of the journey, I feel, because before it had been for me quite narrow, I would say, and quite shallow, but now it really started to encompass these depths and highs and lows and a lot of nuances and a lot of experiential qualities and, both the beauty and both the pain.
Yeah, I can just imagine how confusing it is. So for me, luckily, the way it played out is I found Angelo very early on, and he talked so beautifully, or it was so helpful for me, how clear he makes it that shadow side is such an important part of the journey. So I kind of at least had that understanding that when these kind of deep depression kind of states would come up, it was like, okay, I understand that this is the shadow work, but I can imagine if you didn't have a context for it, it must have been very, the mind just feels like it's lost. The whole process has gone wrong or something as well.
Yeah.
So it's just helpful to know that.
It was so strong somehow, at least for me. It has been so strong, this condition from spirituality that, you shouldn't suffer. That suffering is bad. And all these negative emotions that are generally considered negative, that there's something about them that, shouldn't be there with awakening. And I don't know how come that condition ended up being so deep for me, but even later on when I ended up having these deeper awakening shifts, like no self and so on, I would very, very intensely suffer because of that particular conditioning that, hey, you're not supposed to suffer.
Yeah. I think that's where a helpful teacher can just smooth out the process a bit, just to understand what a natural part it is. Yeah.
It's so funny because the suffering is almost like the way, it points the way. Well, we can go into that later, but it's a magnificent teacher for sure, and especially if you have to find your way on your own with it. If nothing else, at least it kind of qualifies me, I feel, to a certain extent, at least, that I can speak from my direct experience from the suffering and kind of finding my way with it, So if I'm now working with others with that, everyone who takes this journey of, the question of suffering and turning towards it, I can really work with them in a very intuitive manner because I know what it is.
You've been there, you've met it.
Yeah.
But I just want to point that out for anybody who's listening to this, what a important pointing that is. That I feel like this was again, Angelo was one of my main teachers, and he kept on pointing me back to suffering itself. It's that is your actual teacher. Anybody else can be a guide or a pointer, but it's the investigation.
Angelo is a very clear teacher. I would say, Yeah.
Okay. So how did that unfold? So you were having this kind of, like you said, that's kind of pulsating the light and the dark, and how was that a shadow work phase, and then what happened next?
So I feel actually I haven't told this part of the story before in an interview, but I think it could be interesting for some people.
Yeah.
So after I had maybe 3 years, this type of pulsation waves, I ended up meeting someone with whom I thought that this is the person that I could have the kind of relationship that I had always wanted to have. And it was for me one of my deepest kind of longings, to have that type of perfect relationship, I guess, or what I imagined would be the perfect relationship. And I thought that would kind of be what I was longing for more than anything. So that, I would say, was for me actually the primary longing at that time. What I would call love, But love without truth is not really love, like I eventually came to.
So how did that unfold, that relationship? Yeah.
So it was first so beautiful, the first short period of time that it started, and it was almost like everything that I had kind of wanted. And then it ended up being like, it was totally almost like teared apart by life itself. And there was nothing really neither of us could do about it. There was also like a lot of intensity about the way it really pulled out like all of the traumas, at least in my system, because I had this deep non-dual awakening, and then this relationship in itself would be almost like a catalyzer for those non-dual states to open up. So actually the trauma then started to surface like full on, and I had no tools to really work with it, no that type of tools that I have now, like somatic awareness and emotional work and all of that. So it was pretty overwhelming experience, I think, for both of us to have that sense of that initially very beautiful relationship to just kind of like, disappear into into Kali's mouth or something like that.
Where were they? Were they also on like they had like a non-dual shift, or what was their kind of context?
We have connected like after like quite a few years after and talked, and no, for that person it apparently he didn't have that type of non-dual inclination. Like he would kind of hear my story and be like, wow, like, oh, that's what you were experiencing. He was like, yeah, it wasn't like that for me.
Okay.
And I was like, really? Because it for me felt like a shared kind of a reality, obviously at that time, but so when the relationship ended up falling apart in such a brutal way, and for me, very unexpected way, and sudden and painful way, like something about it just was so shocking for my system that it was almost like my sense of self literally like shattered. That's how it felt like, very physically and in a very, real manner. And also my sense of reality, like it was a very, very what I would actually call the first real awakening, but it definitely didn't feel like that at the time. It felt like, oh my God, I lost everything. Because after that, I couldn't anymore access any of those mystical states or non-dual openings. It was like after that, the dark night really kicked in, and it was then continuous for about 4 years.
It's interesting how important those relationships that happen can be on the path, like for me as well, like to bring up, like you said, that you're now open to that trauma kind of all being brought up, but you need somebody else to help you bring it to the surface. So it's incredible how that plays out. Like it's been the same for me. I had that quite recently, actually, like last year, just like something that just completely broke me open. And I was reading Adyashanti's book, The End of Your World, and I was just kind of going back through it again, and he mentioned, do you know Adyashanti's work?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, and he mentioned exactly the same. Like after his first shift, it was a relationship that broke so much open. So
I know that story. It's very resonant with me.
Right, same. I was reading it and I was like, this is very easy to relate to. Yeah, so you mentioned like that kind of shattered your sense of self and was like a deeper awakening in a sense, but it also plunged you into the real dark night. Can you talk us through a little bit what that dark night phase was like? Yeah, how were you experiencing it as well?
So I definitely would not call it awakening at that time. It more felt like a loss of... because prior to that, I wasn't, again, religious person because of my background with Christianity, but due to these non-dual openings, I actually experienced my journey at that time in some sort of like Gnostic mystical manner, I would say. And I would have these beautiful experiences, like what I would call dazzling darkness, like of the void and of this type of like just pure kind of source awareness or something like that. So anyway, so all of that was kind of gone. I couldn't really anymore have those experiences. So to me, it felt like the loss of God, what I would actually call it afterwards. And I also lost the capacity to anymore believe in any kind of narrative, that if I just figure this thing out in my life, then I will be happy. Like or if I achieve the great awakening, like if I manage to finally have the right experience and make it permanent, then I will be happy. So all of that was shattered. And I know it sounds probably really childish to have those type of, and it is, I think it's this immature part of the journey when we imagined, we would get all these things from life. And
I think it's
all my ideas about what love is also shattered,
Yeah.
Like love really, I feel it really has grinded me open in this journey, but not in a way that the mind imagined it initially, So profound disillusionment and really starting to really work with the trauma at that point in a very therapeutic work and that type of somatic awareness, because I felt like all the ways that I used to escape it were completely taken away from me. I didn't have any other choice than just to be with it and work through it the best that I could. And it felt like there's nothing to go. There's nowhere to go. I felt it was so hopeless. Like I didn't have any vision whatsoever. And there was really no other choice than to just endure and surrender like that, kind of like active surrender.
Were you doing most of that trauma work on your own, or did you have any practitioners that you were working with, or anyone?
I had a couple of therapeutic relationships.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was a little bit hard for me to work with them because they didn't have non-dual background, and they couldn't really comprehend the nature of this shattering, what I call the shattering of my sense of self, and why I was longing so deeply those whatever was lost, those experiential openings. They simply could not relate to any of that. So I learned not to talk about it. And I only processed with them the attachment trauma that was activated with this sense of shattering of reality.
Okay, yeah. So it was helpful to an extent, but I agree with you. Like I often, I worked with therapists early on before I had any sort of a shift. And then later on, when a lot of trauma was surfacing, I often thought of going back, and I was like, how am I even going to relate any of this into words to somebody that's, I think to find a non-dual therapist. I think there's more of them out there nowadays.
There's more of them now. So that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. I think if someone finds them, that's obviously the best, but I can totally understand that. Yeah. Not really able to relate that to a traditional therapist. So
but interestingly enough, in the middle of that dark night, I did have kind of like a taste of what's on the other side.
Okay, yeah.
So a Georgian teacher that I used to like very much at the time when I was still, in my glorious heights of my initial awakening. I had never met him before, but I had read his books, and he came to Finland. So I was back in Finland at that time.
Who was this?
Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche is his name, and he has a Burn tradition as well. So he would actually do a little retreat on the school where I used to go when I was a small child,
Wow.
So it was very interesting experience then to go there and participate. And while it was happening, I couldn't again open up to those states, nothing like that. But I felt that it was good that I was there, that I at least took that step, even it felt kind of pointless. And I remember asking him towards the end of it, I put the question, I stood up and I said, I had this trauma, very deep kind of shattering, and I feel like I lost my soul. And, I feel I've tried everything. And then he just said something like, maybe you haven't tried everything. Maybe you tried a lot of things, but not everything.
Okay.
He said that. And then also in the end, when we finished the retreat, he also said, when he was kind of saying the gratitude or everything, teachers usually do at the end of the retreat, then he said that, and some of you will receive the transmission in delay. So even if you didn't feel anything, it may come in delay. And then again, he just looked at me, after that. And I didn't think about it. I kind of, left the event. But about 1 week or something like that after that, I did end up having a very, very kind of powerful opening. Again, this type of gut level release. It was so, and it was much more clearer, like than the initial experience that I had had in Kauai. Like this one was like pure void. There was no visions at all, like nothing like that. It was almost like that pure void just opened itself in my system, and just this awareness. Awareness. It's almost impossible to talk about it because first it's just like absolute nothingness and just total cessation and just infinite peace beyond comprehension. And then suddenly it's kind of like, but the void is full of, presence. It's not, empty. And then it recognizes itself, and and it was again, this type of such a deep relief for me, like such a deep relief, like tears and tears. I would just cry and feel this, the joy of recognition.
So was that the end of the dark night period? Or
that was right in the middle of it. So it would stay like that for a few days or a few weeks even. And then it would contract, and apparently everything would continue the same way that it was before. But it's kind of hard to explain it. After that, I wasn't worried anymore. I would still suffer. I would still feel the angst. But it's kind of like instead of being 100 meters below the ground, and it's complete darkness, now it was almost like being 2 meters below the ground and there's complete darkness. And I kind of knew that it's almost done.
Yes,
of course, I didn't know it in my mind, but something in my system knew that I just didn't care anymore. And 2 years after that, I had what I like to call the first awakening, which was then just very, very clear recognition that the self-referencing mechanism, it doesn't refer to something actually existing. And that has been super clear ever since. That was now like 5 years ago, I guess, or something like that. And it wasn't anything spectacular when it happened. It wasn't that type of powerful, energetic opening. It was a clear seeing. So it didn't have those experiential byproducts, but there was this tremendous sense of relief of a psychological burden that I had been carrying all my life almost. And also a sense that the dark night, at least that specific dark night that I like to kind of call the dark night of the will, of the personal will, that was ended. I had other dark nights after that, but they were very, very different after the first awakening. I think that's one of the hardest, the dark night of the will. When the personal will is just really like this terrifying force is just kind of like grinding it out of the system. And you don't understand what's happening. It's like, why is this happening to me?
You're just being dissolved in a sense. Yeah. What lineage was he from, the guy that gave you the transmission? Do you remember?
The lineage? Oh, he's from Jochen lineage.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting because do you know Frank Yang at all?
I know. Yeah, I like him a lot.
Yeah, he's working more now with like the Vajrayana kind of Buddhism, and he mentioned to me that he's receiving transmission from some secret person that he couldn't share. But I was just curious about the role of that part of the journey. These kind of transmissions that you receive.
Yeah, when I had the initial opening in Kauai, I was more immersed into this Saiva Tantra tradition that I told you I studied initially in university, and then later on experientially, I would also meet teachers from that tradition after I had this opening. So those are kind of the two main traditions that I felt connected with during this process. But eventually, I ended up kind of waking up out of all traditions.
Going beyond all of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so after that kind of, like you said, the first awakening in a sense, then, how did life unfold there? What was your relative life looking like at that time? I'm curious. What were you working again or?
It was kind of very, very simple. I was back in Finland. I didn't travel anymore. I felt that I needed to really be grounded. I would have a little bit of work going on, but not really much. Mostly, I would just feel I needed my system needed a lot of time and space from healing from that sense of shattering that I was still trying to process in so many ways. Yeah, so life was very simple. And after the first awakening, it kind of continued apparently exactly the same. And the few friends that I had, they couldn't, of course, see that something, for me, like something had radically changed,
Yeah.
And I couldn't really communicate it to them. Like, what would I say? Like, hey, there's no actual, like the
Yeah.
self is just the grasping, but there's no one grasping. I think I tried to explain it once to my good friend at the time, and she was just be like, huh.
Was she like into any sense of like spirituality or awakening, or just like,
yeah,
okay, yeah.
we had definitely that shared interest, but
Yeah,
yeah.
not to that
But
depth.
at the time, also, when it was still happening for me, it was very hard for me to articulate anything in a very clear manner. I would more be, my experience was rather that, hey, everything that I ever thought I was, I am not. It was like, wow, all of it. So after that was clear, there was this tremendous fascination. Okay, what can I find in my experience, like any kind of beliefs or conditionings, and how can I question them? And it became like this very like beautiful and kind of ecstatic deconstruction process after that that started to unfold, because for me it was very clear with the first awakening that there's more to it, not more in a sense that it's anything other than what I am, because that was suddenly very clear that that this basic clarity, this recognition that there is no actual self in a way that I had thought there was. And instead, there is just this direct immediacy and just this direct, immediate presence. And, openness. Openness was the word that I prefer to use for that first awakening. And that's somehow what I am. So that was super clear. But also it was very clear that, there's, further. There's this further with this. And at that point, I kind of already lost everything in my life. I felt I didn't really have anything to lose. And I kind of sensed that there needs to be this willingness to pay any price, so to speak. So at that point, I made a very clear decision, and I can't really say that I made it, but it kind of was made through this first awakening, and also as a result of all the tremendous suffering and pressurization and the dark night. And it was like all these conditions just contributed to this absolute conviction that gave birth to itself. And the conviction was simply that, like, liberation is possible, like truth realization is possible.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I don't know how to get there, but that's what my life is about. And I will do that. And even if it will take my life, even if the physical body will drop, and I know this sounds traumatic, but it was very clear, so be it,
Yeah, yeah.
And it was very, very powerful for me, that intention for the next 2 years that followed in the awakening journey, because it would be there all the time, all the time. From the first thing I would wake up, I would tap into that intention, and it would be there during the day. And it would be the last thing that I would think about when I would go to sleep, So it wouldn't let go of me. It wouldn't let go of me. It almost like it possessed me.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it so much. I was like, this is what I've been waiting for my whole life. And now it's finally happening. It's almost like it's like, yes.
Yeah.
Now we are breaking through,
Yeah. Two things come to mind there. One, how Adyashanti has said it, like when you cross, it's like a black hole, and you've crossed the what do they call it, like the horizon point,
event horizon.
Event horizon. And it doesn't matter. You're just being like, there's no.
And then you're kind of being flushed through the black hole. So there's that part of the process, So.
Yeah. And then the aspect that you said that, like, it's the way Angelo said it, like that one pointedness, that like everything you've been looking for is now just in one thing, in a sense. It's like not scattered around in all these different aspects of the human. It's like, okay, this is all that really matters. It's like it's that. Yeah. So how did you said then the next 2 years, that was the kind of the conviction was with you all the time, and how did those 2 years then unfold, and what happened? Were there any other shifts after that?
Yeah, well, they were I really loved that part of the path, I must say. And sometimes I had even a bit of nostalgia, like, oh my God, that was great, I wish I could go back to it one more time, at least a little bit. I mean, it was also devastating at times. It wasn't like just ease and flow. It was absolutely like ruthless, and merciless, but also tremendously just beautiful for me. So it took me into a kind of place where something inside of me started to settle and be like, that if I push like this, I basically say that whatever this is right now is not truth. It started to become more and more clear for me. So any kind of pushing would be I would basically say that this right now is not truth. And at the same time, there would be this sense that I know this is not complete for me. So it was a weird kind of paradox, But I felt like not falling in love with life and reality as it is right now would be somehow the denial of truth. So that paradox became very, very clear in my experience. So it was almost like life was asking me to let go of that desire for truth, which I had, which has been such a powerful intention. But, and I was in this very almost like koan-like situation, like how can I let go of it? I said I would do it or die. And at the same time, now the process is asking me to kind of relinquish that, my deepest desire or something like that. So that was the kind of weird koan that ended up happening, that I just felt that everything is so beautiful that I just love also just the practice at the way it was happening, and I love the mystery, and I love walking on the path, even I know it's not going anywhere other than what is, and something about it was also very like satisfying. So there was that gesture of letting go, and quite soon after that letting go kind of was just relaxing into itself. Then I had second shift, and that was the major shift that I've had, and it was a bit less than 3 years ago in spring 2022.
Okay, yeah. I love what you said about that, like the paradox kind of burning itself up, where there's that conviction that's gotten you so far, but now that's getting burned up by the conviction itself, or like by truth itself. Yeah. It's so paradoxical, but but both aspects are like necessary, that like feeling that there's something more to be realized here, but that what is being realized is just this as well. So what was that second shift like? Can you talk us through that a bit?
Yeah. So are you familiar with the unfettering model?
Yes.
Yeah. So I only learned about it within the past year or two, but it's been a kind of useful way to understand my own process, actually, like looking back at it. So I would say, with the first awakening, the three first fetters drop, and that's very much my experience. And then there's a lot of work with the reactivity, meaning the fourth and fifth fetter.
Yeah.
And that, I think, also continued in certain way for me after the second awakening. But when I had the second awakening, the fetters like 6, 7, and 8, they dropped almost like all at once. So that was a very powerful then kind of release, like energetically. The way that it started to happen is that sense of there being some sort of center, like energetic center of my experience, or that the psyche is somehow contained, so that's released.
Yeah.
So that's the major, what I like to call just energetic release in boundlessness. And there is a sense that suddenly the psyche is just nothing contains it, nothing bounds it. There's no actual boundaries. It's almost impossible to explain, but you can kind of recognize all the same elements in your psychology or in your experience, but now it's just very non-dual, like the experience, that everything is pure energy. There's no any actual reality to it. Everything is very fluid. Everything is morphing constantly. You can't really find any solid ground anywhere, because whatever the experience is in this moment, it releases into another, and all the emotions are very, very fluid. Like I would start to feel emotions in a very like universal manner. Like there could be this sadness, which felt like the sadness of the whole universe, or everyone who has ever felt that, and it would be just so powerful and deep. And the next moment it would be just joy, just like pure joy. and then it would be deep terror, like existential, like just like pure fear. But that would move through always very kind of fast and fluid after I had this non-dual kind of shift.
Yeah, like what you said, like it's that it's more that energetic sense than like later on, like initially those first three fetters is like the kind of mental identity or like the kind of beliefs in the self structure, and then later on it's like there's still that energetic kind of contraction or that kind of energetic sense, and that's kind of where it goes. Yeah.
So I think the energetic boundlessness was very salient first, and then it started to mix into this like luminous, transparent quality of everything. So then the dream-like nature started to be very obvious, that there's no actual external world, that this is all just kind of transparent, luminous, energetic, awareing substance, which is dreaming itself moment by moment. So the formlessness started to then slowly become more salient. So it started to be this mixture of energetic boundlessness and formlessness, and the sense of self would still be there for a moment, but now it was this almost like universally expanded sense of just fluxating, and then that I sense would completely drop. And for me, that would my system had this like very thorough cessation at that point, in a way that I haven't experienced before.
Right.
And so and after that, the whole reality kind of like rebooted itself, and there would be a sense of kind of stepping back to the dream. And now the dream was like completely empty. It was just like emptiness walking, emptiness interacting with itself, everything being so transparent and so dissolved, like it almost like the whole sense field was just nothing, and it was just shining the emptiness. And so that was for me the second shift, like all of these kind of feathers dropping and the structures of reality kind of permanently collapsing. And the first few months that followed were very beautiful, because I felt like it was born, whatever this was, it kind of was fully here. Like I would look around, and it's like I saw myself for the first time as everything, something like that. So it was almost like newly born, and it was, there was just so much delight, that and amazement, kind of like about what had happened, that it somehow, whatever this is, this unconditioned energy, that it broke through and gave birth to itself, something like that. And the Viivi was not here anymore. So that was gone. And that started to be almost like a source of grief for me after a few months, when I then started to realize that something is really gone. I can't really anymore find something that used to be there. I can't find any landing ground. I can't even find interior anymore. So then the whole sense of interior was gone. And when there's no interior, there's obviously no exterior. And so I would say first, actually, the experience was more like just everything is fully internal, but then even that dropped away. So there's no interior or exterior. And then it really hit me, like what's not there anymore, like what is actually the whole I thought, or what it was. And it was like, it was beautiful again, but it was terrifying, because it was very clear. It had never been there. It's just a thought. And with the I thought, it was very clear that there's also no world. And it was like completely like terrifying kind of remembrance then, like, well, what's the nature of this presence then? It's completely empty. It's not even existing in any sense that we imagine, that the presence, that it has that inherent existence. So suddenly I really dropped fully into this type of very void-like reality, which again, it had its own beauty, but there was like deep kind of grief that it came with, that I was grieving a lot for quite a few months. And I felt like I had completely exited the human realm, or and I knew I could never go back into it, and I didn't want to. And it's not, it has to happen when it happens. I knew that it was so perfect what had happened, but at the same time, I craved a lot. I craved a lot for the first year that followed.
Yeah. I can relate. Just at various stages in this process, there's been so much grief that's come up for me as well. And it's like, when it's there, I didn't even know what it was about, but it's like, it becomes clear that it's about the grief of the identity structure, I suppose, just kind of like, yeah.
Yeah, and everything it comes with.
Yeah, exactly. Like everything.
Yeah. So first it just felt for me like this devastating absence, kind of like I felt I can't anymore experience myself because there wasn't anymore that type of anywhere to land, you could say, or any sense of direction, any up or down, or this or that, or here or there, or like all of those, you could say, dualities kind of collapsed.
Yeah.
I mean, but eventually, when it clarifies this shift, it's really, it's almost like, again, that in the Christian mysticism, I think they call it the cloud of unknowing. So it's like you enter into this total unknown, like this total absolute silence. It can feel like silence or just total void or total nothingness, and you can't take anything or anyone with you. So it has that. Kind of sense of nakedness, like you just enter there alone, and you enter this very deep existential aloneness, which is not loneliness, but is when you realize that the nature of the presence, kind of that, what it actually is, and the nature of the dream, that there never really was other to be in a relationship in the way that we thought there was.
Yeah, I'm going to have to put a caveat at the beginning for people that not many people have spoken so in depth about the later stages. So it'll be, it could be quite triggering. But so that was like 2 years. What, that was 2 years ago? Or when was that?
Yeah, so I had this shift almost 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
And I would say the first year was very much like I described now, like this void nature, very much immersion into kind of like pure potentiality or just infinity, eternity, void-like nature of reality. But the energetic quality would still be there for me. It would more like come through in waves. And then there would be like a lot more aliveness and intimacy and inspiration, and I would write poetry always when I would have these kind of kundalini waves moving through the system, and again, more trauma that would release every time when that would happen. So it's almost like the whole process then alternated a bit for me between this void and energetic quality of the realization or the empty nature of it, and then this kind of energetic universal kind of, which is very compassionate also. It's this whole experience of compassion starts to really be born out of that, what I like to call the energetic aspect of awakening. Yeah. And then now I'm starting to feel that they come into some sort of balance in my experience, which is feels like this equanimity, like beautiful equanimity, and this like quality of like non-arising, not quality, but that's just, the kind of immense, like unimaginable simplicity, which at the same time it's deeper than deep. It's just so crazy deep in so many ways, and so paradoxical, and
I like what you said about writing the poetry when it's like the kind of the void side, because I've noticed I do the same thing. Like recently, that was like just what was happening, like this kind of calling to some poetry, which I never used to write much of. Yeah. So how's the relative unfolded for you over since that shift? Like now you started working with people. Were you doing that before that, or?
No. I started to do that within the past year.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I've been also teaching small retreats in Finland, and that I've been doing about maybe 2 years now, or 2.5 years. Yeah, the relative is interesting. Like now I'm really starting to feel how, and I think Angela talks about this really well, like how amazing it is when the absolute starts to feel so comfortable finally, like in the relative experience.
Right.
When you go through this whole process in this type of way, it suddenly like it can really inhabit itself in this natural humanness. So I'm really enjoying, like right now, this particular phase where you can kind of go into situations in the relative, like social situations, or even situations that can be challenging, or there can still be some fixations moving through the system, and but experiencing all of that as nothing other than the absolute, kind of penetrating itself into itself through the texture of the relative experience. So there is that type of interpenetration and interpermeation, which I think it's so like endlessly fascinating, and it's so experiential, and kind of been exploring that for the last at least 1 year now.
Okay, nice. Yeah. I haven't quite reached that, where the absolute feels so comfortable and the relative it's still working itself out. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, those are so deep, those conditionings in our system, that I felt that even after the no self shift, I would still have some actually quite strong conditionings that would tell me, like, do not speak. Like, this was something, I guess, very strongly in me. It was very hard for me to speak for quite a while, like really uninhibited and freely, and kind of find my voice and all of that. And also I have a little bit of neurodivergency, so maybe that also contributes this, that there was some sort of like inhibition there. And so that was super enjoyable when that was kind of started to unwind and release itself. And now I feel kind of very free and fluid in the expression. Yeah,
I can relate to that. Honestly, I've had some, like, because like you said, those conditionings can be so strong, and also you don't really know what's there, in a sense, like what conditionings are there. And I found these conversations for myself, like half the reason I really love them is because of what it brings up energetically in me, or like what's kind of like what's still revealed. Like I've done quite a few of these now, like with people that are very kind of in these deeper stages, and it's very interesting to see like what's pulled out specifically by someone that's kind of in that space energetically.
Yeah, it's a kind of powerful mirroring, I feel.
Yeah.
And it starts to really pull things up in an interesting manner.
Yeah.
But also there's always, I feel like, some sort of expansion and growth that can happen, when we exchange perspectives. And like I assimilate yours, you assimilate mine. I feel there's some sort of my perspectives are always expanding when I do that with anyone, and I think that's the nature of reality, that it likes to kind of expand and grow like that. Even though in actuality there's no development or growth, there's this aspect of realization, which is the non-arising, and you kind of see that there is nothing could ever happen in that sense. But that's just
Yeah, that's such a good point, though, because I actually had a conversation with somebody about that aspect recently, where because so many people come from like all different kind of lineages or perspectives or backgrounds, and like different ways of talking about how the process unfolds. And then I completely agree, like it just also continues to shatter any beliefs about, I think Angela has spoken about this, and I continue to see this in myself, like any belief about the way that awakening happens in people, like the more you have these conversations, like, oh wow, it can happen like that, or it can happen like this, and it's just so varied. And that kind of that transmits in like the talking about it. Well, what a ride. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us.
It's such a powerful ride, and then there's the rest of the life to kind of for the system to acclimate to it, or kind of there's some sort of harmonization that I feel that is happening, like with the humanness and the absolute, like the realization. I like it very much. If you know the ox herding pictures, one of the pictures is where the ox is gone, meaning the realization it feels like it's gone because it's so assimilated, and then there is this never-ending fusion of our human experience and the realization, and the person is also gone. So it's very strange, strange experience.
But I like what you said about like the time is almost necessary for the the energetics of it to kind of balance out and acclimatize in the system. It's kind of, I think Ryan said it, either when I spoke to him or when he spoke with Angelo, like if it happened all at once, like the nervous system would just die, you know? Like it has to, the energetics kind of just need to unfold. And how's that for you now? Like energetically, what does it feel like? Is there any blockages that still come up or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the first couple of years after the second shift were quite intense, I would say. But then it reached this point, and now I'm again going to use the unfettering model because I think it's really helpful to understand what happened, and because nothing really changed, but something started to be very different. And I think that's the 10th fetter when that really... Right. It wasn't there. Then it was suddenly very clear what the ignorance is, you could say, when it just, it was almost like this unveiled nature that suddenly was just very, very, very salient. And it's very mysterious because then the suffering very clearly is not, it never was what it appeared to be. So it's very hard to talk about it. And of course, there can still be, heartbreaks and, like heart openings. And that's like part of the beauty of the realization that all of that is like available, but somehow that basic ignorance that is at the root of the suffering, it's not there, And so I can't really anymore even say that I remember what suffering is, in a sense that I can't remember that basic ignorance anymore. I know that I went through it, I can speak about the journey, but it's not anymore in my experience. And in my experience, it feels like kind of like this is how it's always been, because that's the nature of the unconditioned. It's always been absolutely unobstructed by this apparent game of, obscuration.
And has there been any more? It's interesting. I like Frank Yang because he really broadcasts his life and the relative really clearly with like dating and relationships and all of that kind of still unfolding. How has that been for you? Has there been kind of any relationships post the liberation experience, or if you want to talk about that at all?
Well, for me, for quite many years, because of the dark night and because of the kind of very immersive nature of the awakening process, all like romantic relationships fell away. They just were not really part of my reality anymore. And now, after this thing starts to settle for me, I think that whole concept of romantic kind of attraction, it's so much based on this need to be special, which is at the core of the whole experience of the identity. So now when that is not there, or you can kind of see it, how much suffering it actually creates, this need to be the special one for someone, and that someone to be very special. And then you kind of create this fantasy together, which will eventually cause suffering, like any, story will. So I don't really know about romance, but there can definitely be attraction. There can be friendship and, deep connection. And all of that seems to just be much more real than any of that, how it used to be, because that was almost like you never really even saw the other person for who they were, because you would see them through, the stories and projections that were awakened in their relationship due to these unresolved samskaras that get activated. So it's very hard when we are still in the grip of identity to really meet another person. So it's almost like we need to clear ourselves first to be even able to see the other one as, the unknown, the mystery, that they really can be anything at any moment. They are not any fixed way of being, and they contain the whole multitude, the whole spectrum of human experience and divinity, and you can never know like who they are or what they are. And that's very scary for most people, I think, like if you still live in that paradigm of identity, because that's what people call safety. That, I know you, I know, and I can trust you to be the way, I like you to be or something like that. And that's not available when you really wake up to the unknowability in relationships in this type of way. And I think that's, beautiful. Of course, there's the bittersweet quality of transience. I was actually today writing about it a lot, because when you really wake up to that in a relationship, in a connection, it's kind of like, that they're, in a way, it's not there in a way that it appears to be there, but at the same time, it's like it's so beautiful,
Such good points. Like the fact that that's the first time you actually really see somebody not with all these projections of what it's going to give you or how it's going to make you special or get rid of your suffering. And I love what you said about that mystery, because that's what I've noticed too. It's just like you can't know, like without any of those like images on the person or anything like that. It's just so mysterious, which has its own beauty to it, because it's just like they're infinitely unknowable in a sense. But also the transience, which is a good point, which that's what I actually love about Frank Young's sharing on this kind of stuff. I think it's so clear through his expression that, he'll share like his relationships and it'll be like completely authentic, like genuine depth and love and whatever, the way he shares it, and then it will just be gone. And then it's like, and there's no, not that same kind of whole projection and attachment into time of like, okay, this relationship is here forever and it's going to be like this or like that. It's just like so transient. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think, we've covered a lot. We'll maybe end it there. Thank you so much. This has been a blast talking with you, and a lot of deep insight in this.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Awesome.